Each trip she said it was work, each night she slept with him 15 years. I played dumb, documented everything, then took it all, leaving her with nothing but regret. Autumn in Bloomdale comes with a certain finality. The trees outside our 3-story Victorian home surrender their leaves with a theatrical flair, like actors taking their final bow. I've watched 27 such autumns from the 3rd-floor study of this house, my parents' house, technically, never in both our names. A decision that seemed overcautious 30 years ago now feels like divine foresight. After nearly 3 decades at Ironwood Manufacturing, I finally retired as operations director. 50 years old, financially secure, with a family that could have been ripped from a Norman Rockwell painting. At least that's what everyone thinks they see. My daughter Tessa, now 28 and pregnant with her 2nd child, lives just 20 minutes away with her husband Brandon, a systems engineer who's as meticulous with his family as he is with his code. From the outside, we're the American dream, realized successful career, elegant wife, loving daughter, growing grandchildren. But Elaine and I stopped truly talking years ago. Our conversations became transactions, dinner plans, utility bills, whose turn to call the plumber. The silences between us grew so thick they became a third presence in our home. In her defense, Elaine plays her role perfectly. At 48, she still turns heads as the poised healthcare event coordinator, the woman who remembers everyone's children's names and brings homemade scones to neighborhood meetings. Her social graces are flawless. Her performance is impeccable. I first noticed the pattern 4 years ago. The annual medical conference in Boston, always 3 days on her calendar, though the actual event lasted exactly 1. I didn't think much of it initially. Extra time for shopping, perhaps, meetings with colleagues, until small changes started accumulating, like interest in a new perfume that smelled of sandalwood, rather than her usual jasmine designer clothes appearing in her closet with tags mysteriously removed. Late nights blamed on client dinners, followed by a cheerfulness that seemed performative in its intensity. I'm not sure what made me drive to Boston that fall afternoon. Some primal instinct, perhaps. The hotel lobby gleamed with polished marble and crystal chandeliers, busy with conference attendees in navy suits and sensible heels. That's when I saw her, my wife of nearly 25 years, standing by the concierge desk. Her hand rested on a man's forearm, her head tilted back in genuine laughter. Not the measured chuckle she offered at my jokes, but something unrestrained, almost girlish. I recognized the man's type immediately. Another engineer, silver at the temples, wearing a sports coat that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. I didn't make a scene, didn't call out her name, didn't march over demanding explanations. I simply left the weight of certainty settling in my chest, like concrete hardening. That night, Elaine returned home, slipped into bed, and wrapped her arms around me as if nothing had happened. Her embrace felt foreign, clinical, like a doctor checking vital signs. I lay there rigid as a mannequin, realizing I'd become nothing more than a prop in her carefully constructed life. 2 days later, I called Howard Cale Howie to those who'd served with him. We'd bunked together during my brief military stint before Ironwood. Now he worked as a private investigator specializing in infidelity cases and financial deception. I gave him everything: her travel itineraries, hotel preferences, work email accessed through monitoring software I installed on her laptop during a system upgrade I volunteered to handle. I felt no guilt. When you suspect someone has been betraying you for years, privacy becomes a luxury they've forfeited. Within 3 months, Howie delivered a manila envelope containing what I already knew in my heart: photos of Elaine and the man Randall Sutton, senior engineering inspector at Camtech Casting, dining intimately in hotel restaurants. Receipts for room service ordered to suites booked under false names. Security footage showing them holding hands in an elevator. Her wedding ring clearly visible. But the recordings were what broke me. Elaine's voice breathless on a phone call. "I miss the smell of your aftershave. I hate going back home. I hate lying next to John." 25 years, a quarter century spent building a life with someone who hated the mere proximity of me. This wasn't some midlife crisis or temporary infatuation. This was systematic deception. A double life maintained with frightening competence. I sat in my car outside Howie's office for hours that day, wondering how I'd missed the signs. Or perhaps I'd seen them all along and chosen blindness as self-preservation. I maintained my own performance after that. Each morning I kissed her goodbye. Each evening I asked about her day. I attended neighborhood barbecues with my hand on the small of her back, smiling at her stories, laughing on cue. All while meticulously documenting every inconsistency, every lie. A hollow man going through the motions while planning his resurrection. When the package arrived on our doorstep one Tuesday afternoon, I was alone. No return address, just a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a gray silk handkerchief. The initials E.S. embroidered in crimson thread. Elaine S., not Elaine Keller. I'd never seen this handkerchief in our home, never noticed it among her possessions. As I held the soft fabric between my fingers, I understood with perfect clarity that I was holding tangible proof of a life deliberately hidden from me. A life where my wife of 25 years chose to be someone else entirely. I held that handkerchief for hours, turning it over in my hands, running my fingers across the embroidered ESE. I didn't confront Elaine that night, or the next day, or the week after. Instead, I prepared for a war that would span years, not minutes. A cold, calculated dismantling that requires patience above all else. We continued our choreographed life together. Sunday brunches with Tessa and Brandon, Christmas card photos in matching sweaters, anniversary dinners where we clinked glasses to many more. All while I meticulously researched Randall Sutton, learned his habits, his weaknesses, his pressure points, how he proved invaluable delivering information in secure drops that revealed the full picture. Senior engineering inspector at Camtech Casting's Boston division. Married 20 years to Caroline Sutton High School English teacher. One daughter, Melissa, 16, and applying to colleges on the East Coast, homeowner and Brookline member of Oakdale Country Club. His company was a third-tier supplier to Ironwood, a connection I filed away for future use. The next medical conference arrived with predictable timing. This time I was ready. I flew to Boston a day early, checked into a different hotel, and waited. The parking garage was nearly empty when I positioned myself on the hood of his silver Audi. A car too flashy for an engineer's salary. I watched him exit the hotel, laughing with Elaine before she peeled away toward the taxi stand. He walked with the confidence of a man who believes he's won. When he approached his car, his face registered confusion, then recognition, then unmistakable fear. "Get off my car," he said, voice steady but thin. I didn't move. 15 years is a long time to fuck another man's wife. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his eyes darted toward the exit. "I'm going to call security." I slid off his hood, then stepping directly into his space. 15 years of holidays she spent texting you from our bathroom. 15 years of conferences where you ordered room service and champagne on my dime. His hand moved toward his pocket, reaching for his phone or perhaps a weapon. I didn't give him the chance. My fist connected with his jaw, a solid impact that sent him sprawling against the concrete pillar. Blood immediately spurted from his nose, staining his crisp white shirt. Before he could recover, my foot found his ribs, not hard enough to break them, but enough to leave a memory. I crouched beside him, keeping my voice even. "I'm not going to kill you today. Your daughter Melissa doesn't deserve to lose her father right before college. But if you contact my wife again by text, email, or fucking carrier pigeon, I will show up at your door in Brookline and we'll finish this conversation." He stared at me, blood trickling down his chin. I reached over and plucked his phone from his jacket pocket. No password protection. The arrogance of a man who never expected to be caught. I scrolled through endless messages, voice notes, and photos. Years of documentation he'd stupidly preserved like treasured souvenirs. I committed the worst to memory. Then dropped the phone on his chest. "Delete everything today. She's not worth your daughter's future." Back in Bloomdale, I maintained the performance. Kissed Elaine goodbye each morning. Asked about her work. Planned Tessa's baby shower. But beneath this thin veneer of normalcy, I began systematically dismantling Randall Sutton's life. First came an anonymous letter to Camtech's HR department detailing an inappropriate relationship with client personnel and suggesting possible conflicts of interest in quality inspections. Within 2 months, he was let go, restructuring they called it. Through my industry network, I tracked every job application he submitted, then made discreet calls suggesting his work ethic was questionable. Once I established a small account at a firm, considering him, positioned myself as a potential client, then withdrew interest, citing, concerns about their technical team's capabilities. The beauty of industrial manufacturing networks is their insularity. A whisper here, a doubt there. Opportunities dried up. His technical expertise became irrelevant against the power of reputation. All while I smiled across the dinner table at Elaine, who remained blissfully unaware that her carefully constructed house of cards was already burning. I discovered the second email account on her laptop 3 months after confronting Randall. The messages between them made me physically ill. One in particular burned into my memory. "You're always who I think about when I'm touching John. You're the reason I can endure this fake life." I extracted that email, encrypted it, and stored 3 copies on separate hard drives. Evidence accumulates like compound interest, slow at first, then exponentially. After the confrontation, Elaine initiated sex more frequently. She believed we were reconnecting. I participated mechanically, watching her face for signs of the deception. I now knew intimately. Her body felt hollow to me, a vessel emptied of meaning. With each passing day, I felt myself hardening, calcifying around the wound of betrayal until nothing soft remained. I purchased a moss green Mustang GT500, a car I'd wanted since childhood. Paid cash. Kept the documents in a safe deposit box Elaine didn't know existed. When she asked to drive it, I refused. Said it was too powerful, too temperamental. The truth was simpler. I couldn't bear the thought of her in the one space that was wholly mine. She didn't even know what kind of fuel it required. The text message came on a Tuesday morning from an unknown number. "I know it's you. But my daughter's starting college next fall. Please stop. She doesn't know anything about this." I read it twice, then deleted it. Randall Sutton had finally realized he wasn't battling an angry husband, but a patient architect of retribution. And unlike his hasty pleas, my plans required no response. Some messages are answered best with silence. The invitation to dinner at Tessa and Brandon's came as no surprise. Sunday family meals had become our tradition since they bought their craftsman-style home last year. The evening started innocently enough, Brandon grilling steaks on the patio, while Tessa, 7 months pregnant with their second child, arranged fresh-cut flowers from their garden. Elaine brought her famous apple crumble, playing the doting grandmother-to-be with practiced precision. After dinner, the conversation naturally drifted to baby names. Tessa rubbed her swollen belly, explaining they were struggling to find the perfect name for their son. "We want something with meaning, you know. Not just trendy," she said, leaning against Brandon's shoulder. Brandon nodded, pouring more sparkling cider into our glasses. "We've been considering family names. My grandfather was Edward, but there are already 3 Eddies in the extended family." "What about Marshall?" I suggested, taking a sip of my drink. "After your great-grandfather, right?" "That's on the short list." Brandon agreed. "Strong name, good history." Elaine, who had been quietly cutting her dessert into precise squares, suddenly looked up with an expression I'd come to recognize the false spontaneity that always masked calculation. "What about Randall James Dillon?" She said, her voice honeyed with affection. "You could call him Randy for short. It sounds strong, masculine, a name with real presence." The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon's hand froze mid-pour wine, hovering dangerously close to the rim of his glass. Tessa's eyes darted to her mother, then to me. I carefully set my fork down beside my half-eaten dessert, the metal meeting porcelain with a soft clink that seemed to echo in the silence. "What did you just say?" My voice emerged surprisingly steady, belying the volcanic pressure building beneath my ribcage. Elaine blinked, her smile faltering only slightly. "Randall. It's just a name I've always liked." I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate control. "You just suggested our grandson be named after the man you've been sleeping with for 15 years. I turned to Tessa. "Your mother wants your son to carry the name of her lover." Elaine's face drained of color. "John, that's ridiculous. It's just a name that came to mind." "A coincidence." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "The same way it's coincidence that your 3-day conferences only last 1 day. The same way it's coincidence that you're always texting in the bathroom on Christmas morning." Tessa's hand flew to her mouth. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I reached for my laptop bag, which I'd brought under the pretense of showing Brandon some retirement portfolio options. "I've known for years. I've documented everything. I extracted my computer, powering it on with methodical precision. I confronted him last year in the hotel parking garage, broke his nose, systematically dismantled his career, and now your mother has the audacity to suggest naming your child after him. The laptop screen illuminated my face as I pulled up files organized with military precision photographs of Elaine and Randall entering hotel rooms, audio recordings of phone calls, email exchanges extracted from accounts she thought were secure. He drank himself to death 3 months ago. I continued, voice clinically detached. Couldn't find work anymore. Wife left him. Daughter stopped speaking to him. Elaine's composure finally shattered. She lunged across the table, knocking over her wine glass. Dark red liquid bleeding across the white tablecloth. You're sick. You're obsessed with the past. It was nothing a mistake. A 15-year mistake. I turned the screen toward Tessa, showing an email dated just 2 weeks earlier. This doesn't look like the past to me. This looks very much like the present. Tessa pushed herself away from the table, tears streaming down her face. Brandon stood, positioning himself between Elaine and me. His jaw clenched with fury. If my wife had done this, he said, each word precisely enunciated, I would divorce her tonight. Fortunate timing, I replied, reaching into my jacket pocket and extracting an envelope. Divorce papers, already signed. I'm filing them tomorrow morning. Elaine stared at the envelope as if it might burst into flames. You can't. I very much can, I interrupted. And I've been preparing to for 5 years. I outlined the offshore accounts established under Marwick Holdings, a shell corporation I'd created with meticulous care. Explained how I'd worked with Ironwood's HR director, a man whose son I'd personally mentored through college, to officially classify me as a middle operations manager, earning $42,000 annually on paper while channeling my actual $200,000 salary through subsidiary consultancies. You'll get exactly what the court mandates based on my documented income, I concluded, not a penny more. Elaine's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. You can't prove anything. My attorney Miles Griggs disagrees. You remember Miles handled the Westbrook divorce last year. CEO walked away with 90% of assets intact despite a 30-year marriage. Your infidelity is thoroughly documented. The judge will be sympathetic. I stood, tucking the laptop back into its bag. Tessa hadn't moved, her face buried in her hands. Brandon stood beside her, one hand protectively on her shoulder. I'm sorry you had to learn this way. I told my daughter, meaning it, but I couldn't let her use your child as another chess piece. I left without looking back at Elaine, the sound of her desperate sobbing following me out the door. The night air was cool against my face as I walked to my car, the burden of secrets finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt something resembling peace, a clean wound rather than a festering one. When I arrived home, the front door was unlocked. The house was dark, silent in a way that suggested emptiness rather than sleep. On the kitchen table lay a handwritten note. Elaine's precise penmanship now jagged with emotion. I still have secrets you've never known. Want a divorce. Fine, but don't think I'll go quietly. I folded the note carefully, slipped it into my pocket, and poured myself 2 fingers of scotch. Some threats deserve acknowledgement. Others are simply the last gasps of the drowning. I wasn't certain yet which category Elaine's belonged to, but I'd planned too methodically, too patiently to be concerned now. As I sipped my drink in the darkness, I realized the house no longer felt like a stage set for a performance I'd grown to despise. For the first time in decades, I was alone. Truly alone, but no longer lonely. The distinction made all the difference. The incessant ringing of my phone jolted me awake at 4:37 a.m., 3 days after filing for divorce. Tessa's panicked voice cut through my sleep-addled mind. Dad, it's Mom. They think she took too many pills. They've got her at Fox Hill Regional. You need to come. I don't need to do anything, I replied, my voice gravelly with sleep and residual anger. Please, Dad. Her voice cracked. I know what she did was unforgivable, but she's still my mother. I closed my eyes, pressing the heel of my hand against my forehead. Fine. I'll be there in an hour. Fox Hill Regional Hospital smelled of industrial disinfectant and desperation. The fluorescent lights in the emergency ward cast everything in a sickly green pallor that made even the healthy look ill. When I reached Elaine's room, I hardly recognized the woman lying in the bed. Her carefully maintained honey-blonde hair had been chopped short, its natural gray showing at the roots. Without makeup, her face looked hollow skin, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones, feed tubes snaked from her arm to hanging bags of clear fluid. A far cry from the polished woman who'd spent decades perfecting her exterior while letting her interior rot. Tessa stood when she saw me, her pregnancy making the movement awkward. Brandon hovered protectively behind her, dark circles under his eyes. "What happened?" I asked, not approaching the bed. "They're saying intentional overdose." Tessa whispered, "Sleeping pills and vodka. The neighbor found her on the bathroom floor when her alarm wouldn't stop going off." I nodded, hands in my pockets, maintaining my distance from the hospital bed. "What do the doctors say? Or she'll recover physically?" Brandon's voice was clinical. "But they want her under psychiatric observation for at least 72 hours. Tessa stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. "Dad, her insurance won't cover the extended psychiatric care she needs. Would you consider adding her back to your policy? Just until she's stable." The request landed like a blow. "No. Dad, please. I've met every legal obligation the courts assigned." I replied, my voice measured. "I'm not required to do more. She did this to herself." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. I hated seeing my daughter in pain, but this was a boundary I wouldn't cross. Brandon cleared his throat. "Tessa, can I talk to your dad outside for a minute?" Once in the hallway, his expression hardened. "Don't cave," he said bluntly. "She's manipulating everyone, especially Tessa." "You don't need to tell me that." "I do, because I see how you look at Tess when she cries." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Elaine's playing the fragile victim now, but she didn't show an ounce of remorse until she got caught. This hospital stunt is just another performance." I nodded, grateful for his clear perspective. When we returned to the room, Elaine's eyes were open, watching us with a vulnerability I knew to be calculated. "John," she whispered, her voice raspy, "thank you for coming." I remained by the door, arms crossed. "I'm here for Tessa, not you." She nodded weakly. "I understand. I want you to know that what happened with Randy was a mistake. A small error in judgment that spiraled. It ended years ago." I stared at her, saying nothing. The weight of her lies hung heavy in the antiseptic air. "Please," she continued, tears welling in her bloodshot eyes. "Can we talk? Just us." I glanced at Tessa, who nodded encouragingly. 5 minutes," I said. After Tessa and Brandon stepped outside, Elaine's demeanor shifted subtly. Her eyes, though still watery, focused more intently. "You're destroying me," she said softly. "You destroyed yourself." She shook her head slightly. "I'm pregnant, John. It's yours. Our last child." A laugh escaped me, harsh, involuntary. "You don't have a uterus anymore, Elaine. I drove you to the hysterectomy surgery 7 years ago, stayed with you for 3 days of recovery." Her expression faltered momentarily before she regained her composure. "Experimental procedures? Stop." I turned toward the door. "You can't even keep your lies straight anymore." The nurse entered with discharge paperwork and a substantial bill. I took the documents, skimmed them, then handed them back. "You'll need to bill the patient directly." I said, "We're in divorce proceedings." The nurse's expression softened with misplaced sympathy for Elaine. "Sir, she doesn't have insurance coverage." "That's not my concern." Elaine spoke up from the bed. "I can stay with Tessa for a few days while I sort things out." I turned to her, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Go ahead, but understand this. If you poison my daughter's marriage with your manipulation, you'll lose the only person still willing to help you." Later that week, Tessa called me, her voice tight with stress. "Dad, Mom's been telling me things about your marriage. She says you were always cold, that you never really loved her." I sighed, watching fall leaves dance across my lawn. "What do you think, Tess? Do you believe that I don't know what to believe anymore?" Her voice cracked. "Did you ever love her, Dad?" Really, the question deserved honesty. I loved your mother more than myself for 20 years. That's why her betrayal cut so deep. That's why I'm still bleeding from it. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. People like your mother don't understand loyalty. They see it as a weakness to exploit, not a strength to honor. Silence stretched between us, broken only by her quiet sniffling. I don't know how to handle this. She finally said, "You don't have to choose sides, Tess, but don't let her make you collateral damage in a war she started." After we hung up, I sat on my porch watching twilight settle over the neighborhood. The houses around me contained families with their own secret fractures, their own hidden wounds. None of us ever really knows what happens behind closed doors. The email arrived just before midnight. No subject line, just an attachment and a brief message. Don't be so certain, science has its surprises. The attachment was a blurry ultrasound image with Elaine's name in the corner. I stared at it for a long moment before closing my laptop. Some desperate acts require no response. This was clearly another performance, one I had no intention of attending. 2 months after the ultrasound email, which I'd dismissed as another of Elaine's desperate manipulations, Tessa invited me to dinner. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," she said. Her voice carried a deliberate casualness that immediately put me on alert. When I arrived, Tessa's someone turned out to be Shelby Maris, her former college roommate. At 29, Shelby was unmistakable, with her vibrant copper hair cascading in natural waves down her back, framing a heart-shaped face dusted with freckles. She wore a simple emerald-wrapped dress that complemented her fuller figure, and when she extended her hand in greeting, I noticed chipped purple nail polish, a refreshing departure from Elaine's always perfect manicure. Shelby's taking night classes to finish her accounting degree. Tessa explained over dinner. "Dad, didn't you say you were pretty good with advanced statistics? That's what's tripping her up." Shelby's laugh was self-deprecating. "Tripping is an understatement. I'm completely lost in the weeds." I found myself offering to help before I'd fully considered the implications. Something in her genuine embarrassment disarmed me, the absence of calculation I'd grown so accustomed to detecting. Later, Tessa explained that Shelby had briefly worked as a body-positive model before retreating from social media after being targeted by online harassment. She'd been open about living with lipedema, a chronic condition causing disproportionate fat accumulation in her legs. "She's been through a lot," Tessa said quietly, "but she's the most honest person I know." Our first tutoring session took place at a Starbucks near her night school. Shelby arrived with color-coded notebooks and 3 different textbooks. Her organization belying her claimed ineptitude with numbers. We spent 2 hours working through regression analyses, and I found myself enjoying the straightforward exchange. No hidden agendas, no layers of meaning to decode, just equations with definitive answers. "Same time next week?" she asked as we packed up. When I nodded, her smile struck me as unreasonably radiant. For someone who'd just spent hours wrestling with statistics. Weeks passed, and our Saturday morning sessions became fixed points in my newly solitary life. Eventually, the coffee shop's bustle grew distracting, and I suggested we continue at my house. If Shelby recognized this as a significant step, inviting someone into the space I'd reclaimed from the wreckage of my marriage, she didn't comment on it. What struck me most about Shelby was how she listened. When I occasionally referenced my divorce, she neither pried for details nor offered platitudes. She simply absorbed what I chose to share, offering understanding through presence rather than words. For someone accustomed to strategic conversations where every response carried hidden purpose, her directness was like discovering a new language. "Your ex-wife sounds like she was fixated on appearances," Shelby remarked one afternoon after I'd mentioned Elaine's obsession with our holiday card photos. "That must have been exhausting." "It was," I admitted, "like living with someone who's always performing, even when the audience is just you." Shelby nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I spent years trying to be what others wanted professionally, physically, romantically. All it got me was panic attacks and hating my own reflection." She smiled ruefully. "Now I figure if someone doesn't like the actual me, they can find the exit." The shift in our relationship happened gradually. Then suddenly the way twilight deepens into night. One evening she offered to help organize my home office, which had devolved into chaos during the divorce proceedings. As we sorted papers, our hands brushed, and I found myself arrested by the warmth in her eyes. That night we never finished the filing. 3 months into our relationship, I woke to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, hands pressed against her face. "What's wrong?" I asked, instantly alert. "People will talk," she said without turning. "The age difference. Your recent divorce, they'll say I'm taking advantage or you're having a crisis." I sat up beside her. "Do you care what they think?" She finally looked at me, eyes bright with unshed tears. "No, I feel safe with you. That's worth more than anyone's opinion." When she told me about the pregnancy 6 weeks later, her hands trembled uncontrollably. "I've scheduled an appointment," she said. "I don't want to complicate your fresh start." I caught her hands in mine. "This child isn't a complication. It's life telling me I'm allowed to love again." Her sob was half laughter as she fell against my chest. "You're insane. You know that, right?" "Probably." I agreed, holding her closer. "But I'm also certain." Telling Tessa proved challenging. She sat perfectly still on our couch, her expression unreadable as I explained about Shelby the baby, our intention to build a life together. It was Brandon who broke the stunned silence. "As long as you're happy, John, we support you." He glanced at Tessa, who remained frozen. "Right, babe." Tessa finally blinked, her voice carefully, measured. "I need you to be clear with Mom. I won't have her harassing Shelby. I'll handle Elaine," I promised. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Elaine arrived unannounced while Shelby was preparing dinner. She pushed past me into the house, stopping abruptly when she spotted Shelby at the stove. "This is why you've cut me off financially." Elaine's voice rose with each word. "For this fat child looking for a sugar daddy." Before I could intervene, she lunged forward, grabbing Shelby's dress and tearing the delicate fabric from neckline to hip. Shelby's cry of shock brought our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Fleming, to the open door just in time to witness Elaine screaming obscenities. The police arrived within minutes. Elaine was arrested for disorderly conduct and simple assault, still shouting accusations as they led her away. Shelby stood wrapped in my bathrobe, trembling but remarkably composed. "I'm so sorry," I said later after the officers had taken our statements. "For what? You didn't attack me." She touched my face gently. "This isn't your fault, John." The incident created another rift with Tessa, who was horrified but conflicted about her mother's behavior. When she came to visit a week later, her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. "I don't know what to do anymore," she confessed. "Mom's staying with us, crying every night about how you abandoned her, how cold you've always been." "Tessa," I said carefully, "if you need to choose your mother, I won't hold it against you. But Shelby and this baby are my family now." She broke down, then tears she'd clearly been holding back for weeks. "I just wish Mom had some dignity left. She's destroyed everything. I won't let her do it to you again." We decided to marry quickly, a small ceremony with minimal fuss. Shelby wanted nothing elaborate, just family and a few close friends. The trouble began when anonymous letters started appearing at Shelby's workplace and our church, alleging she was a known escort who had previously been sued for entrapping older men. It didn't take long to trace the source. The emails had been sent from Tessa's IP address, specifically from her laptop, which Elaine had been borrowing to search for apartments. The confrontation in Tessa's living room was brief and final. I faced Elaine across the coffee table, Tessa and Brandon flanking me in silent support. "This ends now," I said, voice steady. "No more contact. No more manipulations. You are not welcome at our wedding. If you show up, you will be escorted out by police." Elaine stood silently, her once immaculate appearance now haggard. Without a word, she gathered her meager belongings into a garbage bag and walked out the door. 1 week before our wedding, a package arrived at our home. No return address, just a plain brown box similar to the one that had contained Elaine's gray handkerchief all those months ago. Inside was Shelby's ultrasound photo, the joyful image we'd proudly displayed on our refrigerator, now defaced with red ink, and a handwritten note. "It will never be born." I called our lawyer before Shelby could see it. Some threats cross lines that can never be uncrossed. After the threatening package, we relocated our wedding to Vermont, a small, rustic farm that had belonged to my great-uncle, police-stationed plainclothes officers at the perimeter. Though I never mentioned this to Shelby, some fears are better left unspoken. The late September morning dawned crisp and golden sunlight filtering through amber leaves with an almost ethereal quality. Only 40 guests stood witness in the converted barn, close friends and family who had weathered the storm of my divorce and Elaine's increasingly erratic behavior. Tessa, her pregnancy now showing, prominently served as Shelby's maid of honor. Brandon walked beside me carrying their toddler son, who clutched our rings with solemn importance. When Shelby appeared at the barn entrance, my breath caught. She wore a simple ivory gown with cap sleeves, her copper hair adorned only with small white flowers. No elaborate makeup, no ornate jewelry, just Shelby illuminated by autumn sunlight, more radiant than anyone I'd ever seen. As she walked toward me, one hand resting protectively on her growing belly, I felt a certainty I'd never experienced in 25 years with Elaine. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Shelby whispered when she reached me. "The opposite," I replied. "I feel like I'm finally seeing clearly." We exchanged vows beneath a canopy of maple branches and fairy lights. When the justice of the peace pronounced us husband and wife, Tessa wept openly, squeezing my hand with unexpected strength. "I'm so happy for you, Dad," she whispered. "You deserve this." The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing under string lights and toasts that acknowledged not just new beginnings, but the hard truths of renewal, that sometimes we must lose everything to find what matters. We returned home the following afternoon, tired but content. The serenity lasted exactly 7 minutes, the time it took to pull into our driveway and discover my Mustang with its windshield smashed to glittering fragments. The security cameras I'd installed after the ultrasound incident had captured everything. Elaine wearing a hooded jacket, methodically destroying my car with a metal bat before speeding away in her sedan. The footage proved undeniable. Police arrested her that evening at a motel outside Boston. After 3 days in holding, she was released with a restraining order that permanently barred her from approaching Shelby or me. The court-mandated psychiatric evaluation, which she refused to attend. No surprise there. Elaine had always rejected any suggestion that her problems might lie within herself. Claire Eleanor Keller arrived on a snowy February morning after 18 hours of labor. I stayed by Shelby's side throughout, witnessing her extraordinary strength as she brought our daughter into the world. When the nurse placed the tiny red-faced bundle in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of both vulnerability and fierce protection. I never thought I'd get to start over. I told Shelby, as she rested exhausted but radiant, "You've given me that, and so much more." She smiled sleepily, reaching for my hand. We gave it to each other. As Claire grew, Elaine's life continued its downward trajectory. After multiple violations of the restraining order and increasingly hostile public outbursts, even Tessa finally severed all contact. Brandon had insisted their son was beginning to ask questions about the angry grandma, and Tessa's pregnancy was already high risk without additional stress. Old friends from the medical conference circuit quietly distanced themselves from the scandal. Elaine's professional reputation, once impeccable, lay in ruins after she'd sent drunken, accusatory emails to several hospital boards. She eventually relocated to a rundown studio apartment in Boston's poorest district, subsisting on the modest $400 monthly alimony payment the court had mandated. My attorney had argued successfully for the minimum obligation, citing her years of infidelity with extensive documentation. Howie, ever vigilant, occasionally updated me on both Elaine and Randall. The latter's story ended tragically in a private nursing home. His depression and alcoholism accelerated after losing his engineering career, his marriage, and finally his daughter's respect. He died alone, his funeral attended by only a handful of former colleagues. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had years earlier anonymously established a scholarship fund for Melissa Sutton. Now a promising attorney specializing in representing victims of marital betrayal, she had no idea that the Keller Foundation, supporting her law school education, was named for the man who had systematically dismantled her father's life. Some karmic debts can never be fully settled, only acknowledged. I systematically erased Elaine from my home, and life-burning old letters and photographs, deleting digital archives, selling the sectional sofa, where we'd spent countless evenings in strained silence. I replaced it with a single comfortable reading chair, just wide enough for Claire to curl beside me for bedtime stories. Life rearranged itself around new constants: weekend drives with Shelby and Claire, in my restored Mustang, now repainted classic black. Monthly meetings with a support group for divorced men rebuilding after betrayal, where I shared my story not as a victory, but as survival. Summer road trips along Route 66 with my new family Claire, pointing excitedly at roadside attractions, while Shelby photographed everything with unabashed tourist enthusiasm. 5 years after our wedding, fate orchestrated an unexpected encounter. During a cross-country drive, we stopped at a gas station outside Chicago. As I walked toward the convenience store, I spotted her Elaine sitting behind a lottery ticket counter wearing a faded blue uniform, her once immaculate hair now entirely gray and carelessly cut. She saw me, but quickly averted her gaze, shoulders hunching forward as if to make herself smaller. I purchased gas and a winning scratch-off ticket worth $1,000. Before leaving, I approached her counter and silently placed the ticket in her tip jar. When she finally looked up, recognition and confusion battling in her eyes, I spoke only once. "Don't use it to try to come back. Buy yourself a hot meal instead." She didn't respond, but something like resignation settled across her features. Acknowledgement, perhaps, that some battles end not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet surrender. That night in our hotel room, watching Shelby and Claire sleeping peacefully, I reflected on the journey. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately led me here to this imperfect but honest life, to love freely given rather than strategically measured. I didn't win. I thought, stroking Claire's unruly red curls. I survived, and sometimes living well after trauma is the most profound revenge. The next morning, I locked our hotel room and settled behind the wheel of my Mustang. Hanging from the rearview mirror was a small bronze keychain Shelby had given me on our first anniversary. Engraved in simple block letters was the phrase that had become my silent mantra: "Never again, John, never again." Not a promise of revenge, but a covenant with myself. Never again would I allow deception to replace truth. Never again would I choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable honesty. Never again would I mistake performance for love. As we drove west toward home, Claire singing along to the radio from her car seat, Shelby's hand resting lightly on my shoulder, I finally understood. The greatest victory isn't destroying your enemy, it's refusing to become them.